Welcome to this deep dive into the world of Formula One. We're really focused half a day as we look ahead to the Bahrain Grand Prix.
That's right. We've got a great collection of insights here, looking back at Japan, but mostly, previewing what's coming up in Bahrain.
Exactly. So our mission really is to unpack all of this, figure out what these reports and analyses are telling us about the next race, and maybe the bigger picture for the teams.
Yeah, it's amazing how much is already happening, isn't it? Just a few races in, and the dynamics are shifting. Gives us a lot to talk about.
Okay, so let's maybe start by looking back at Suzuka, the Japanese Grand Prix. A really big theme across everything we looked at is, well, no surprise, the continued strength of Max Verstappen and Red Bull.
Yep, definitely. Although it felt like McLaren maybe closed the gap a little bit, especially on a track like Suzuka, lower degradation.
That's true, but still, Verstappen's skill, and you really get the sense Red Bull is laser-focused on that driver's championship.
Oh, absolutely. The reports, they all mentioned him grabbing pole and then the win, and some suggested it was partly, maybe small errors from McLaren.
And perhaps their strategy wasn't quite as, let's say, aggressive as it could have been. There's this feeling, isn't there, that Verstappen and the team are just completely locked in on this title goal.
Totally aligned. Even if, the long-term future for them together seems a bit uncertain.
Yeah, uncertain is a good way to put it.
And what's really interesting, I thought, was the idea that maybe the Red Bull isn't always the absolute fastest car out there every single weekend.
Right.
One of the F1 blogs really dug into this, saying it's Verstappen's talent and Red Bull's strategic sharpness that are making the difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. They mentioned the team radio after the win, apparently.
Yeah.
Sounded like a really united front, just focused on getting Max that crown.
Which does make you wonder, doesn't it? How much are they balancing the constructors versus just going all in for the driver's title?
Right. It's a good question. And, speaking of Verstappen's performance, this is where it gets kind of interesting historically.
Oh.
Yeah. One source directly compared his start this year to Fernando Alonso back in 2012 with Ferrari.
Ah, okay. I remember that season. Alonso was incredible.
He really was.
Yeah.
But the consensus seems to be, look, Verstappen's been amazing, but the current Red Bull is just a much, much better car than that 2012 Ferrari was.
Right. That Ferrari, it wasn't consistently fighting for podiums, was it? It was more about Alonso dragging it places it shouldn't have been.
Exactly. So while Verstappen's ability to win, even when maybe he doesn't have the outright fastest car, is impressive, and it draws parallels to Alonso's, sheer resilience.
Yeah, the baseline performance of the car itself is just, well, it's different. Much higher for Red Bull now.
It definitely highlights Verstappen's talent, but yeah, it also reminds you how strong that Red Bull package still is, even with McLaren snapping at their heels on certain tracks.
Absolutely. McLaren are definitely making progress, closing that gap. We saw that at Suzuka.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit, let's talk other teams. Mercedes, and particularly Antonelli, seem to be improving. That was noted in one report.
Yeah, Antonelli's performance, his ability to just get up to speed so quickly and have strong race pace, that's definitely turning heads. Seen as a potential threat, maybe, to Ferrari?
Speaking of Ferrari, the sources suggest they had some trouble in Japan. Issues controlling the car's ride height.
The ride height, yeah, that's crucial. Basically how close the floor is to the track. Too low, you hit the ground, get instability, maybe even penalties.
Right. And the suggestion was Ferrari couldn't quite manage it in Japan. Maybe had to run the car a bit higher, which costs you downforce, performance.
Definitely. Especially with these ground effect cars, the floor is everything. And that issue might carry over to Bahrain, which is tough on tires, higher degradation.
Unless they bring some significant upgrades, particularly to the floor, you'd think.
And there's always that little bit of, let's say, apprehension around Ferrari upgrades, isn't there? Given past inconsistencies sometimes.
Yeah, fair point. So the focus will be on whether they've got that sorted for Bahrain.
And Antonelli, going back to him for a second, if he keeps this up, consistently fighting near the front, that really adds another layer of excitement, doesn't it?
It really does. Makes that battle at the front even more complex.
And Ferrari's ride height, yeah, definitely a concern. Compromising that setup just costs you lap time, plain and simple. Can they fix it for Bahrain? That's the big question mark.
Okay, what about McLaren's approach in Japan? That was another big talking point in the F1 blogs.
Yeah, it was clear the cars were quick, especially Piastri's. He seemed to have really strong pace.
But the strategy felt conservative, like they were happy banking points rather than, risking it all for a potential win, maybe causing internal friction.
That seemed to be the thinking, yeah. The rationale apparently is this belief they have a big advantage when tire degradation is high, like they expect in Bahrain.
Mhm. So they figure, okay, we don't need perfect qualifying in Bahrain. Our race pace will be strong enough to win anyway.
Sort of, yeah. That seems to be the calculation, but is that smart?
Well, that's the debate, isn't it? Some are questioning if they're underestimating how important every point is, especially in the driver's fight.
And maybe focusing a bit too much on the Constructors' Championship? It's a fine line.
It really is. One analysis suggests that they felt they could sort of afford not to push harder in Japan, banking on that expected Bahrain advantage.
A calculated risk, maybe? But leaving points on the table, it can come back to bite you, can't it? Especially if the championship gets really tight later on.
Definitely. That decision not to let Piastri really have a go at Verstappen, even though he seemed to have the pace, that was quite telling, I thought.
Very telling. Okay, let's dive into the midfield then. Always a fascinating battle there.
And the expectation is it could all get shaken up again in Bahrain, right? Different track, more degradation.
Exactly. Racing Bulls and Williams keep getting mentioned. Racing Bulls seem maybe a bit more consistent overall.
Yeah, they seem to have a decent package. And then you have Haas. Their approach in Japan was bold.
Bringing that new floor based mostly on CFD, computational fluid dynamics. Yeah, that was risky.
Risky, but it seemed to work out for them in the end. Adds a bit of unpredictability heading into Bahrain, doesn't it?
It does, though relying heavily on CFD without tons of, real-world wind tunnel time can sometimes lead to unexpected issues.
True. And Alpine. Their performance seems very linked to engine power.
Which suggests maybe they'll be a bit closer on tracks where pure power isn't quite as critical, less power-dependent circuits.
Okay. And Aston Martin. They seem to struggle with the wind in Suzuka.
Yeah, wind sensitivity. That could be a factor, again, in Bahrain, which can definitely get windy. A worry for them, for sure.
So the midfield, as always, looks incredibly tight and potentially quite different in Bahrain compared to Japan.
Yeah, that's what makes it so interesting. The different track characteristics really shuffle the pack. Racing Bull's consistency is notable, though. Suggests a pretty well-rounded car.
And Haas's gamble, well, it shows teams are willing to push the boundaries to find performance.
Definitely. Okay, one last area mentioned quite a bit was overtaking.
Ah, yes, the difficulty of overtaking, even with these current regulations that were supposed to help.
Exactly. It seems to be getting harder again, which just puts even more emphasis on qualifying, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Track position becomes king, especially on lower dig circuits where the performance gaps are tiny.
Right. And looking at specific drivers, the Spanish drivers got some attention.
Fernando Alonso, yeah. Strong performance in what looks like, well, maybe not a top-tier car right now.
Impressive stuff. People saying, don't write him off yet. His talent is still clearly there.
Definitely not. And Carlos Sainz for Ferrari also showed some encouraging pace in Japan.
Yeah, closed the gap to Leclerc, managed his race well, even after an early delay. Seems strong.
There's some optimism, reading between the lines, that Bahrain could be a good race for him. He knows the circuit well.
Familiar ground. Could be a turning point after maybe a slightly tricky start to his season, by his own admission.
Although he's missing the first practice session, isn't he? Aston Martin are running Drugovich.
Ah, yeah, the mandatory reserve driver running. Felipe Drugovich gets a go in FP1 for Aston Martin, so Sainz sits that one out.
Which isn't ideal, but...
But like you said, he knows Bahrain well from testing and past races. It probably won't be a massive setback for him, you'd think. His pace at Suzuka was a really positive sign, matching Leclerc closely in quali and managing the race well. Suggests he's finding his groove.
Okay, so let's try and pull all this together. Looking ahead to Bahrain, after digging into all these reports, the picture is, well, it's complex, isn't it?
It really is. You've got Verstappen and Red Bull still looking like the ones to beat. That competitive edge is there.
But McLaren are right there, sniffing around, and they seem to think they have an advantage in the expected high-deg conditions in Bahrain.
Yep, that's their bet. And then Mercedes seems like they're on the upswing, maybe becoming a more consistent threat.
Potentially.
Right.
While Ferrari, they've got that ride height issue to solve if they want to, really maximize their potential there.
Absolutely critical for them. And the midfield, well, that's going to be another super tight battle, you'd imagine.
And strategy calls, especially from McLaren, given their Japan approach, they're going to be under the microscope, aren't they?
Hugely important. So yeah, putting it all together, we've got a potentially really nicely poised championship starting to emerge.
Red Bull focused on Max, McLaren making these strategic plays based on conditions, Mercedes maybe rising, Ferrari needing to fix things. It could be a season with quite a few twists and turns.
Yeah, Bahrain will be a really key indicator, won't it? We'll see if McLaren's confidence in their high-deg pace is justified, and if Ferrari have managed to sort out those technical gremlins from Japan.
So for everyone listening, hopefully this deep dive gives you a much fuller picture of what's going on heading into Bahrain. It's more than just the headlines, right?
Definitely. Understanding the why behind the Japan results, the strategies, the technical bits, it gives you so much more context for what might happen next.
It helps frame what to look for, the potential surprises. It's not just who finished where, but how and why.
Exactly. It's about connecting the dots between Suzuka's low-deg characteristics and Bahrain's higher-deg demands.
Right. So maybe one final thought to leave everyone with. Think about McLaren's calculated risk.
That Japan strategy.
Yeah. If they nail it in Bahrain, if their high-deg advantage is as big as they think, it makes that cautious Japan approach look pretty smart, right? Focusing on their strengths.
True. It would validate their confidence and their long-game strategy.
But if they struggle in Bahrain for some reason, if the advantage isn't there, those points they maybe left on the table in Japan could suddenly look very, very valuable later on.
Yeah, it really highlights that tightrope walk, doesn't it? Balancing the short-term race result against the long-term championship fight. High stakes.
Incredibly high stakes. Always fascinating in Formula One.